Hey folks, this is Rhykker with another Diablo 3 patch 2.6 beta video on the Necromancer. We've been doing a video series overview of the Necromancer's skills. We had to interrupt that series because the Necromancer was removed from beta, so I could no longer record any footage. Now that the Necromancer is back, we're going to try to more quickly go through the remaining skills. So in this video, we're going to go through two batches of skills at once. That'll be the corpse skills and the reanimation skills. In our first two videos, we covered the primary skills, the generators, as well as the secondary skills, the spenders. The first set of skills we're going to take a look at in this video are the corpse skills. These don't require resource to spend, they require corpses on the ground, a resource unique to necromancers. If there are multiple necromancers in a party on PC, every necromancer has his own corpses. You don't see anyone else's corpses, so you don't have to worry about sharing that resource. Anytime a monster dies, it drops behind a corpse, and there are other ways to passively generate corpses. On console split screen, you do share corpses, but one corpse is dropped per necromancer in the group. The first corpse skill we'll take a look at is the Diablo 2 classic Corpse Explosion. The base effect, you target an area exploding all corpses within 11 yards where you're clicking, dealing damage to enemies within 20 yards. So right off, the feel of the skill is great. Again, it feels like Diablo 2's Corpse Explosion ramped up. The damage feels a little bit on the low end for the time being, but those numbers could always be tuned. The first rune, Bloody Mess, simply increases the radius of the explosion to 25 yards. That's a 25% increase to the radius of the circle, which translates into an over 50% increase to the area. Bigger explosions help you hit more monsters. The next rune is Close Quarters. Now we're exploding corpses close to you, so rather than being able to target any corpses on screen, it erupts the ones close to you for more damage. In our previous video, we went over the Necromancer sets, and one of those was a melee-focused Necromancer that does a lot of damage to enemies close by. And right away I was thinking, okay, what if we can somehow combine Corpse Explosion with that, and this rune is the perfect rune for that. So, when that set is made viable damage-wise, and perhaps with some tuning to Corpse Explosion damage, I'd like to see how that combos. The next rune, Shrapnel, corpses now explode away from you, hitting all targets in a cone. This adds a directional element to Corpse Explosion, which, in practice, I found to be a little annoying. The closer you are to a corpse, the more difficult it is to aim where it goes, and sometimes depending on the terrain of the map, for instance, this is the worst map to be using this skill on, it could be actually impossible to aim it in the direction that you want, thus rendering you incapable of even hitting enemies. So overall, not fond of this one. Next rune is Dead Cold. Freeze all enemies caught in the explosion for 2 seconds. This adds a nice crowd control element to Corpse Explosion. We may see some applications for this. And then the last rune, Final Embrace. This one costs some life. It's a blood skill. So some of the Necromancer skills have a blood price. In other words, they cost you a fraction of your health. And it targets an area exploding all corpses within 11 yards, dealing damage. And what's unique about this one is that corpses pull themselves towards the nearest enemy before exploding. And the visual effect of this is ridiculous, and makes for an overall very fun rune. You just gotta be a bit careful with that blood cost, because it's 3% per corpse. So sometimes you only catch one corpse in your area of effect, sometimes you catch a bunch. But this adds some great utility in ensuring that your corpses actually explode on targets. The next skill we'll take a look at is Corpse Lance. With Corpse Lance, you target an enemy, and if there are nearby corpses, it basically pulls their ribs out of them and shoots them at the enemy as projectiles. It's a new idea in D3 and really cool. This deals a lot more damage than Corpse Explosion, however, it's only targeting one enemy at a time. That said, thanks to its ease of aiming, if you're able to kill targets very frequently, then you're going to have an ample supply of corpses, and rapidly, it almost acts like an area of effect, because it's just like a machine gun gunning through everything in your way. The first rune, Shredding Splinters, lets each lance slow the target by 10% and reduces damage by 6% for 10 seconds, and this stacks up to 5 times. So against a Rift Guardian, for instance, that's a possible 30% damage reduction. Next rune is Brittle Touch. Enemies become brittle, increasing their chance to be crit by 5% for 5 seconds. And that's each time they are hit with a Corpse Lance. This is really strong, especially against targets like Rift Guardians. This also serves as a party buff. Next rune is Ricochet. Corpse Lance has a 20% chance to ricochet to one additional target. 20% is 1 out of every 5 hits. So you can very roughly say that this means that Corpse Lance deals 20% more damage. So far, this is the rune that's best against multiple enemies rather than single target. Next, we have Visceral Impact. Stuns the target for 3 seconds. So this is the second crowd control rune for Corpse Lance. This presents an interesting choice relative to Shredding Splinters. Shredding Splinters again was the slow plus damage reduction. This is a flat out stun. I suspect that Shredding Splinters may be more useful overall, given how quickly enemies in Diablo 3 build up crowd control resistance. At least with Shredding Splinters, you still get that damage reduction effect, but we'll have to see in practice. Then lastly, we have Blood Lance. Spend 5% of your total health to launch an additional lance from yourself towards a target, dealing 300% weapon damage. So this is a 33% damage increase at the cost of 5% health. Relative to Ricochet, you're dealing more damage overall, you're dealing it more consistently, since it also works against single target, and that's the point of blood skills. They're meant to be more powerful, but cost you health, meaning you have to modify your build in some way to be able to account for that and recover the health. Which takes us to our next corpse skill, Devour. Consume corpses within 60 yards to restore 10 essence per corpse. This allows us to regain essence without needing to hit an enemy with a generator. Necromancer essence does not regenerate on its own. If you spend it all, you have to find some way to gain it back. The first rune, Satiated, increases max life by 2% for 2 seconds for each corpse devoured. This is a pretty short-lived buff, and to put it in perspective, 10 corpses will give you 20% more health. That's a fifth more health. This might be great for speed content when you're just rushing through things, slaughtering monsters, and able to really keep up that buff. But for pushing, this seems a little less useful. Maybe if that buff lasted longer, or if you're able to refresh your stacks. But even then, it's easily going to fall off against a Rift Guardian, for instance. However, the intent behind this may just be for an immediate source of health in order to cast your blood skills. If this is something that is worked into a build, I imagine it being a very frenetic playstyle. Next rune is Ruthless. Additionally consumes your minions for 10 essence per minion killed. So whether it's your skeletons, whether it's your skeletal mages, or your revives, if you're really strapped for essence, then you can pop this, but then you don't have any minions left. This seems a little bit at odds with a minion build. If you're running a minion build, you ideally want to have all or as many minions up as possible because you benefit from having more minions out, and if you consume them all, then it'll take you a while to get those back. So I'm a little puzzled by the utility of this rune. I'm not sure exactly what the intent was, where it's intended to be used, but we'll have to wait and see. Next we have Devouring Aura. Instead of casting it, it now becomes an aura that surrounds you, consuming all corpses within 15 yards and restoring 11 essence per corpse. This range can be expanded with gold pickup radius. This is definitely a fun rune. If you care less about which corpses you consume, if you care less about sort of managing corpses as a resource and just need to be regaining essence as fast as possible and plowing through content, then this is definitely what you want to go for. This works particularly well for melee builds. Next we have Voracious, reduces all essence costs by 2% for each corpse consumed for 5 seconds. So the main point of Devour is to be an essence generator. This rune is the one that makes it the best essence generator, because you're effectively generating more essence by making your skills cost less essence. If you aren't melee and you want to be spamming essence spenders, then this might be a useful rune. Then lastly we have Cannibalize. Each corpse consumed also restores 3% health. This effectively turns Devour into a rejuvenation potion, gives you resource and health. Again, generally good to combine with, for instance, blood builds. Then our last corpse skill, we have Revive. Target an area, reviving up to 10 corpses within 20 yards for 15 seconds. Now I could have sworn that duration used to be shorter, but 15 seconds is a pretty substantial chunk of time, and you can actually boost that to about 19 seconds with the right passive, which is plenty of time for you to be able to generate additional corpses to revive. Now, before the Necromancer was removed from beta, it seemed that Revive was either overtuned or through a bug was dealing too much damage, and that definitely was something that Blizzard was going to address. Whether it is now undertuned or otherwise nerfed into oblivion, I'm not sure yet. Will require more testing. The first rune, Personal Army, damage taken is reduced by 1% for each revived minion active. You can have 10 revives, so that's 10% damage reduction. Is that noteworthy? Well, it's something. 10% damage reduction is the equivalent of saying, if you get hit 10 times, one of those times doesn't hurt you at all. It's there, but I don't know that it is significant enough to be worth a rune. Next rune, we have Horrific Return with a placeholder listed next to it. I don't know if that just means the name is a placeholder or the entire rune. Honestly, I hope it's the rune because this is a terrible rune. When you revive a corpse, enemies within 20 yards run in fear for 3 seconds. Fear effects are shit. Fear effects are bad. No one likes this. You know what the most annoying monsters in this game are to kill? The ones that run away from you. You know what sucks even more? When your own powers are making monsters run away from you and then you can't kill them. This is the Echoing Fury all over again. In Vanilla D3, there was a weapon. The best in slot weapon was called an Echoing Fury. The unfortunate thing about the Echoing Fury is that it had chance to fear on hit, which was a super annoying effect and undesirable. So the best Echoing Furies that sold for the most on the auction house had the least amount of chance to fear on hit as possible. I mean, Revive is even a timed ability, right? So do you want some of that time wasted by having monsters run away? I don't like this rune. I don't like this rune. Next rune is Purgatory. Revived minions degenerate back into a usable corpse at the end of their duration. This is a good rune. This allows you to have 100% uptime on your revive, under any circumstance. Once the 15 or 19 or whatever amount of time expires, you just click the skill again and they're back up. Now, under most circumstances, it's easy to keep revive up 100% of the time, even without this rune, but, you know, because you're killing monsters, right? There's always corpses everywhere. However, if you're up against a Rift Guardian, then you might have a little bit of a shortage of corpses, so being able to recycle your revives, great rune. Now, the next rune we have is Recklessness. Revive minions deal an additional 15% damage but last 5 seconds. So this is 1/3 of the duration for 15% more damage. And you can't recycle these. Now, before the Necromancer was taken down, this was actually a powerful rune, but I'm not sure if that was due to some bugged interaction or overtuning or what, but looking at it now, it doesn't seem all that great. And one major reason why is that once you revive an enemy, I don't know if you can notice here, but try to pay attention to how long it takes a revive to start attacking enemies once you revive him. That's like a full second wasted. So he's up for 5 seconds. 1 second is wasted in sort of like resurrection sickness. So he's only up for about 4 seconds. 4 seconds worth of dealing 15% more damage doesn't seem like a good trade-off to me. Overall, I feel that the AI really needs to be improved. That once a revive is revived, we don't have a 1 second delay in which it takes him to start attacking enemies. They need to be on it right away, immediately. And maybe to make this rune worth it, if you really want that short of a duration, 15% more damage and 15% attack speed. Maybe, I don't know. And the last rune we have is Oblation. Increases the damage of revived creatures by 20%, but each revive now costs 3% health. Compare this to Recklessness. You have the full duration and 20% more damage. It does cost you 3% life though. Again, this is a blood skill, so it's meant to be more powerful. But the gulf in power between Oblation and Recklessness seems way too large. And that seems to be the fault of Recklessness, not of Oblation. There's still bugs with Revive where we can't see how many revives we have up sometimes, which makes it really annoying, particularly with that bug, or I don't know, that feature where it takes a revive a second to start attacking. So if you know you have 10 revives out, you know you don't have to spawn more. But sometimes you don't know, so you're spawning more as soon as corpses come, just to ensure you always have 10. But then if you're respawning ones when you don't need to, all you're doing is creating a 1 second delay in your damage. So that really needs to be resolved. This issue existed before the Necromancer was taken down. I was hoping it would have been fixed. I'm confident that it will be fixed before beta goes live. But I hope this bug gets resolved soon because it's certainly hampering testing across multiple minion skills. And that covers our corpse skills. Moving on to the next category. Reanimation. Starting with Command Skeletons. This skill passively raises skeletons from the ground, 1 every 2 seconds up to a total of 7 skeletons. Each of them deals 50% weapon damage per attack. So with all 7, that's 350 weapon damage. Then you can actively command your skeletons to attack a certain target in which they'll zip over, attack, and they'll deal 50% more damage for 5 seconds. Being able to command minions feels really good. The first rune, Enforcer, reduces the active essence cost to 25 instead of 50. This allows you to command your skeletons more often, which translates into more damage overall. You can maintain that, 5-second buff for longer, but also it enables you to... It's more forgiving if you misclick and target the wrong enemy, for instance, which can be tricky when you have a whole glob of enemies on screen. So, overall, this is a good rune. Next rune is Frenzy. Commanded skeletons go into a frenzy, gaining 25% increased attack speed for the duration. So you can say this is effectively 25% more damage, but more importantly than that, there's a lot of effects that apply on minion hit. So there are many ways in which the Necromancer gains a buff of some kind once a minion attacks, so 25% increased attack speed is actually more meaningful than 25% increased damage in that regard. Next we have Dark Mending. Skeletal minions will heal you for 0.5% of your total health per hit while being commanded. So 7 minions times 0.5, that's 3.5% per attack, if you will, if you want to consider your whole army 1 minion. So it's not a whole lot of life regen, especially considering it's just for 5 seconds. Over the full 5 seconds, it's definitely noticeable, but it's certainly not overpowered. If anything, it's more towards underpowered than overpowered. Of course, when you start factoring in something like Tasker and Theo, making pets attack 50% faster, then we're talking. Next, we have Freezing Grasp. The target of your command is frozen for 3 seconds. Pretty straightforward, crowd control, only against one target though. So there is some utility there, but again, diminishing returns against Rift Guardians, for instance. And then lastly, we have Kill Command. Now commands your skeletons to explode, dealing 80% weapon damage to enemies within 15 yards. So 80% times 7, that's 560% weapon damage, and then your skeletons are gone. And it's going to take a full 14 seconds to gain all 7 back. Again, this is a little bizarre given that with a pet build, a minion build, you generally want to have as many minions out as possible. You're at your weakest with the fewer minions you have. I could see where they were going with this, but maybe that damage needs to be made a lot more significant if you're going to be losing all of your minions. Though to be fair, if you have 10 revives and a bunch of skeleton archers, maybe it's not all that bad. But overall, I definitely feel like the damage on this could be tuned up if they want to continue with this direction. Alright, our next skill, Command Golem. Cooldown of 60 seconds. Passive, it's like a humongoid, a gargantuan, sorry, with a witch doctor. But the active lets him explode into 5 corpses. This is a way to passively generate corpses. We do have a 60-second cooldown. That said, there are passives to help with that. But still, it does feel like a pretty long cooldown for the Golem. The first rune, Flesh Golem, transforms that 5 into 8, so now you're generating 8 corpses. This is a really useful skill overall. Golem, in and of itself, it doesn't deal a ton of damage, and again, it's single target damage, so Golem is much more a utility skill or spell or whatever you want to call it, and that rune that turns them into 8 corpses pairs really well with Revive. You can instantly revive 8 minions. Next rune is Ice Golem. The active commands the golem to the targeted location where it freezes enemies for 3 seconds and increases their chance to be critically struck by 10% for 10 seconds. That's a nice effect, but it's a long cooldown. Other skills achieve similar to better results and can be used more frequently. Next we have Bone Golem. The active, the golem becomes a tornado of bone carrying all nearby enemies to the targeted location, stunning them for 2 seconds and dealing 2000% weapon damage over the duration. This looks really cool, and it feels really fun to use. In a sense, this is kind of like Piranha's Piranado, in that it sort of crowd controls. It deals more damage than that, but again, the cooldown kinda long. Then we have Decay Golem. The golem consumes corpses at the targeted location, increasing its damage by 30% per corpse. I'm not exactly clear how long this active effect lasts. Is it indefinite? Does it last until you use the active again? There's no way to really see how many stacks of corpses it's being buffed by. This rune could potentially be useful. It could potentially make Command Golem's damage worth a damn, but again, it's just still against single target. I think the Golem, by default, it needs to cleave. Its attacks need to cleave. In other words, it needs to hit enemies in an area around it. Then lastly, we have Blood Golem. The active, the Golem sacrifices itself, healing you for 25% of your health, and reconstructs at the target location. As the Golem reconstructs, Veiny Tendrils damage nearby enemies for 450 weapon damage. So that damage is pretty insignificant. It looks really cool, but this is basically an additional health potion that gives you back 25% health. So there is some use for this. This, in essence, allows you to have 2 different potions on 2 different cooldowns. Then our next skill, Army of the Dead. Very awesome, very visually impressive skill. 2-minute cooldown. Raise a massive skeletal army to pummel the targeted location, dealing 12,000% weapon damage in a 15-yard radius. Now, the 15-yard radius is deceptive with regards to what you see on screen. The skeletons rushing up, that's not the total damage area. The area is a lot closer to you than from where the skeletons are initially emerging. For a 2-minute cooldown, I would maybe want to see that area made a little bit bigger. But as we went over in our previous video, the pet set, the minion set, allows you to reduce the cooldown on Army of the Dead pretty significantly, and this is a very cool power. The first rune, Blighted Grasp. Skeletal hands raised from the ground, damaging enemies within 15 yards for 14,000% weapon damage as poison. So this is a slight damage buff. Here the visual effect is a lot clearer with regards to its scope, but it's a lot less awesome. Next we have Death Valley. The skeletal army knocks all affected enemies towards the center. This really helps get those enemies into the damage range. This is like the Witch Doctor's Piranha's Piranado ramped up into a mega ability. Again, 2-minute cooldown. Next we have Unconventional Warfare. Skeletons will rise from the ground and attack random targets for 50,000% total weapon damage as physical over 4 seconds. This rune is bugged, there's no visual effect to accompany it. And while it's clearly dealing damage, we don't really know how many skeletons are attacking, what is their attack pattern. So it's difficult to make any kind of judgment on this until they sort of add the visual back in, or in at all. Next we have Frozen Army. The army tramples enemies in a line, damage turns into cold. This reminds me very much of a certain Lich King's power. It's a nice variant, but it seems like one or the other will certainly emerge as the best option. Given that the only real difference with this rune is that it changes the area of effect, one will be found to be superior. So either this rune will be the best rune or will be obsolete. Then lastly we have Dead Storm. Raise a storm of the dead that surrounds you, damaging enemies for 15,500 weapon damage over 5 seconds. Typically, Army of the Dead stays where you cast it. This allows it to follow you around. Again, here the visual range clearly reflects that 15 yards. It makes it look a lot less impressive. It's still cool, and at least it's a better indicator of whether or not enemies are being hit. I can definitely see this being a useful rune. And lastly, that takes us to Land of the Dead, another 2-minute cooldown power. All corpse skills can be used at will for 10 seconds. This is a very interesting skill that allows for some crazy combinations. So this is a power that's really fun to pair with either Corpse Lance or Corpse Explosion. It allows you to cast them for free without consuming any corpses. You don't even need to have corpses on screen. Combine that with Devour, Devouring Aura, and you're just automatically, constantly being treated like you're consuming corpses non-stop. The first rune, Frozen Lands. Enemies in the Land of the Dead are periodically frozen. This adds a crowd control component. Plague Lands makes it deal 10,000% weapon damage to enemies over its duration. 10 seconds, that's 1,000 damage per second. It's not a whole lot, but it's considerable. Next is Shallow Graves. Every 10 enemies killed extends the duration by 1 second, up to a maximum of 2 seconds. That was almost exciting, but 2 more seconds isn't... I don't know. It's there. It's a 20% duration buff, but we're already dealing with a power that forces you to stay in the same area. Land of the Dead doesn't travel with you. So is it the end of the world to really make that duration last longer? Given how mobile we have to be in this game, I think it might even be more interesting that if it lasts long enough that you're encouraged to go kite monsters back into the area. Next rune is Invigoration. Your skills do not cost essence while Land of the Dead is active. So not only free corpse skills, also free essence spenders. To demonstrate this, we're going to spawn a bunch of skeletal mages, and we've confirmed now that the max number of skeletal mages you can have is 10. That said, it does not work with the Singularity Rune on Skeletal Mage. The Singularity Rune still uses up all your essence. And lastly, we have Land of Plenty. You are healed for 2% of your maximum life whenever you kill an enemy while Land of the Dead is active. So that's something that's nice to combine with a blood skill, a blood attack, in order to sort of counteract the blood cost. Again, it's not it's not a huge amount of health recovery, but it is noticeable. And that wraps up our overview of the corpse skills and reanimation skills. We're nearly done this series. We'll try to wrap up the remaining skills in one final video. But that wraps up today's video. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Are you liking the skills you're seeing? Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.